When people talk about the greatest receiving seasons in NFL history, the conversation usually starts with names like Jerry Rice, Calvin Johnson, and Randy Moss. Those players all had incredible years that deserve to be remembered, but there's one season that often gets overlooked despite being one of the most remarkable accomplishments the league has ever seen. In 2005, Steve Smith led the NFL in receptions, receiving yards, and receiving touchdowns. He won the Triple Crown, one of the rarest achievements a wide receiver can accomplish. That alone would make his season legendary. However, what makes Smith's 2005 campaign truly special is the context surrounding it. The Carolina Panthers finished that season ranked dead last in the NFL in passing attempts. Think about that for a moment. The most productive receiver in football played for the team that threw the ball less than anybody else. Even that statistic doesn't fully explain how unlikely this season truly was. Because just 1 year earlier, Steve Smith wasn't dominating defenses. He wasn't putting up historic numbers. He wasn't even on the field. After suffering a broken ankle in the opening game of the 2004 season, Smith spent almost the entire year watching from the sidelines. Most players who miss an entire season simply hope to return to their previous level of play. Steve Smith came back and had one of the greatest seasons in NFL history. So today, we're going to look back at the incredible story behind Steve Smith's 2005 Triple Crown season, why it was so unique, and why no receiver has ever been able to duplicate what he accomplished. And we're going to get into all of that right after this.
I'm from the foe, you dig?
The Panthers entered the 2005 season facing more questions than answers on offense. This was not an organization known for airing the football out. Under head coach John Fox, Carolina had built its identity as a physical football team. They wanted to run the ball, they wanted to play defense, they wanted to control the clock. Quarterback Jake Delhomme was a good player and a capable starter, but the offense was not designed around throwing the ball 40 times a game. It was designed around efficiency. At the same time, the Panthers had just lost one of the most important players in the franchise's history. Muhsin Muhammad had signed to the Chicago Bears in free agency. For younger Panthers fans, it can be easy to forget how important Muhammad was to the organization. Before Steve Smith became a superstar, Muhsin Muhammad was the first truly great wide receiver in Carolina Panthers history. He was a Pro Bowler, he was a leader, he was a veteran presence in the locker room, and most importantly, he was somebody that Steve Smith learned from early in his career. Muhammad had just led the entire NFL in receiving yards during the 2004 season. Now he was gone. The Panthers were losing over 1,400 receiving yards and one of the most respected veterans in the building. Somebody had to replace that production. Somebody had to become the focal point of the offense. That responsibility would fall squarely on Steve Smith. The problem was, nobody knew exactly what version of Steve Smith the Panthers were going to get. One year earlier, the outlook surrounding Steve Smith was completely different. The Panthers opened the 2004 season with expectations of making another playoff run. Those expectations took a major hit almost immediately. In the first game of the season, Smith suffered a broken ankle. Just like that, his season was over. One game, that was all he played. Imagine how frustrating that must have been. Players spend months preparing for the NFL season. They train all off season. They go through training camp. They fight through preseason, and within a matter of moments, it's all gone. For Smith, 2004 became a loss. Instead of building on the success of previous seasons, he spent the year rehabbing and recovering. The injury also created uncertainty. Could he still be explosive? Would he lose some of that incredible speed? Could he handle a larger role after essentially missing an entire year of football? All those questions were completely fair. History is filled with talented players who never quite were the same after a significant injury. Nobody could have predicted what was about to happen next.
What happened between you and Talib on the field early in the game?
I don't know. You gonna ask him because he didn't finish the game. Ice up, son. Ice up.
From the very beginning of the 2005 season, it was obvious that Steve Smith was not interested in easing his way back into football. He looked explosive, he looked confident, most importantly, he looked motivated. Defenses quickly learned that this wasn't simply the same Steve Smith returning from injury. This was a player operating on a completely different level. Week after week, he became the focal point of opposing game plans. Defensive coordinators knew where the ball was going. Cornerbacks knew who they had to stop. Safety shaded coverage toward him, and it simply didn't matter. Smith kept producing. He kept making big plays. He kept finding ways to take over the game. One of the defining traits of Steve Smith's career was his ability to play bigger than his size. Officially, he stood just 5'9", but nobody that watched him play football would describe him as small. He attacked defensive backs. He fought through coverage. He played with a level of intensity that few players in NFL history could match. Every catch looked personal. Every route looked personal. And every single game looked personal. That mentality became one of the driving forces behind one of the most historic seasons in NFL history. When the regular season ended, Steve Smith had accomplished something extraordinary. He led the NFL with 103 catches, 1,563 receiving yards, and 12 receiving touchdowns. That combination earned him the Triple Crown Award. Even by itself, that accomplishment is extremely rare. Leading the league in just one of those categories is difficult. Leading all three in the same season requires a special level of dominance. But this is where the story truly becomes unbelievable, because the raw numbers only tell part of what happened. The deeper you look into the season, the more ridiculous it truly becomes. The Panthers' second leading receiver in 2005 was Ricky Proehl. Proehl was a respected veteran who enjoyed a long NFL career. He was reliable, he was experienced, and he was valuable, but he was not a number one receiver. Steve Smith finished that season with 1,563 receiving yards. Proehl finished with 441. The difference, 1,122 yards. That is the third largest gap between a team's top receiver and second receiver in NFL history. Think about what that means. Smith wasn't simply leading his team. He wasn't even competing with his teammates statistically. He was operating in a completely different universe. There are many great receiver seasons that have happened throughout NFL history. Very few feature this kind of separation from the rest of the roster. When the Panthers needed a play, everybody knew where the ball was going, and somehow nobody could stop it.
You don't know who Steve Smith is. By the end of this game, you don't know who he is. I promise you that.
As incredible as an 1,122-yard gap is, there's another statistic that may be even more impressive. Steve Smith had more receiving yards than every other wide receiver on the Panthers roster combined. Not one wide receiver, not two receivers, the entire wide receiver room combined. That's almost impossible to comprehend in today's NFL. Modern offenses are designed around spreading the football around. Most teams have multiple receivers capable of producing significant numbers. The 2005 Panthers essentially had one elite weapon in the passing game, and that weapon carried the entire unit. Now we come back to the stat that separates this season from almost every other great receiving season in NFL history. The Panthers ranked last in the NFL in passing attempts. Last. That means every other elite receiver around the league had more opportunities. They had more targets, more chances to accumulate stats, and just more overall volume. Steve Smith did not have those advantages. The Panthers attempted fewer passes than every other team in football. Yet somehow, the league leader in receptions played in Carolina. The league leader in receiving yards played in Carolina. The league leader in receiving touchdowns played in Carolina. To this day, Steve Smith remains the only receiver in NFL history to win the Triple Crown while playing for a team that ranks last in passing attempts. That's what makes the accomplishment so unique. That's what makes the accomplishment so historic, and that's why it deserves far more recognition than it receives. When discussing the greatest wide receiver seasons ever, context matters. Jerry Rice had historic seasons. Calvin Johnson had historic seasons. Randy Moss had historic seasons. Steve Smith belongs in that conversation. Not because his numbers were necessarily bigger than everyone else's, but because of everything that he had to overcome to produce those numbers. He missed virtually the entire 2004 season with a broken ankle. He lost his mentor and fellow star when Musa Muhammad left in free agency. He played in a run-first offense. He played on a team that threw the ball less than anyone else. And despite all of that, he became the most productive wide receiver in football. Nearly 20 years later, nobody has been able to repeat what Steve Smith accomplished in 2005. That great season was not just great, it was unique and unlike any other. And it may very well have been the most overlooked Triple Crown season in NFL history. Because while other great receivers benefited from pass-heavy offenses and overwhelming volume, Steve Smith did something no one else ever did. He became the most dominant wide receiver in football while playing in the league's least pass-happy offense. And that's why the 2005 season remains one of the greatest accomplishments in NFL history.